a question I had in mind for further, but so I've heard that there are these bot factories or hacking factories, let's say in China or Russia. In Russia, I've heard, and again, this is hearsay, but they have these giant warehouses of people that are working on hacking different institutions in the West, that they have identified where they are, how they function, but it seems like they're unable to shut them down because of what the follow-on consequences might be. So
Mm.
my question is, why, like, what would these consequences be, and why can't we just go in and shut these buildings down?
Sure. And yeah, I can back up a little bit and just say that, like, I don't know that like hacking factories is probably like the best terminology for it. Like most of the time,
Sure.
we use the term like state backed or state directed, and because it can be a range of different things. It's a sliding scale of involvement by the state at this point. And, I think we compare things a lot to the US and very like Western way that this is handled, where it's like in order to do like a hacking operation of some sort, it's military or NSA, and they have this level of clearance. They have to have sign off here, here, and here, and it's treated like an actual military operation. In
Mm.
China and Russia, it's a
Uh,
lot looser, and so you basically had both of them. For Russia, it's much more criminalistic in nature, because it was basically like in the 90s, as the fall of the Soviet Union had happened, and then Putin was actually starting to gain power and ended up becoming prime minister in, I think, like 99, like right before the millennium turned. And he had a bunch of contacts in like the Russian mob, being former KGB and all of these different things. And so what grew out of that was essentially like there had been criminal hacking enterprises in Russia that the mob had tapped into and said, like, yeah, get us money, really talented software developers that were making these new viruses and stuff like that. And then they would kind of co-opt them sometimes for state purposes, or just kind of, try and recruit some of those guys to do that. And China
mm,
did a lot of the same stuff, where basically, first it started off with patriotic hacking. Like there was a whole thing where, like, in 2001, the U.S. Air Force flew like a spy plane, and it collided with a Chinese jet and forced an emergency landing. The Chinese pilot was killed. It's called the Hainan Island incident, by the way, if you need to look it up later. But it's
sure.
and then the U.S. pilots got stranded in Hainan, the southern island in China, and it was this big diplomatic standoff. And during that time, China was basically saying, like, you need to issue a formal apology. And the US kind of was like, no, we were flying in open air and your pilot was being aggressive. And so there's this huge standoff, and it was a big diplomatic thing. And then they finally released the pilots, but the local populace in China had started like hacking a bunch of US sites, and there was this mini hacker war. And from
Mm,
that moment, you could see that the government was kind of like, we don't entirely know how to control this, but at the same time, like, we're not upset about it, because they felt like they were in a diplomatically sensitive position to where they couldn't get the US to apologize. They didn't have the leverage to do that. And so they were more than happy to
mm,
let these guys go off and just kind of do their thing. And then as time went on, they basically started scooping these guys up into the military, or the People's Liberation Army, or the Ministry of State Security. They're kind of their version of CIA. And so they started scooping those folks up at that point. And, that is kind of the definition of like state backed can be one of those military units that is directly tied to the state and the army, or it can be, a contracting entity that gets paid state funds to, carry out intelligence requirements and go collect on those.